Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. I've been seeing this data activism thing everywhere lately, and honestly, it's pretty intriguing. We've got some fascinating research suggesting that it's not just for, the techie people. Like maybe we're all becoming activists without even realizing it.
Yeah, the really interesting thing here is that people are finally starting to realize that data isn't just like something companies collect, it's power,
Right.
right? And that power, well, it can be used in good ways and bad ways.
So data activism is about taking some of that power back. I mean, is it all about protecting ourselves, or is there something more to it?
Oh, it's totally about protecting yourself, but it's also about using data to make positive change. It's about realizing, that you don't have to be a passive bystander in this world that's, well, increasingly driven by data.
Okay, that makes sense. But I gotta be honest, it still feels a little abstract. Do you have any, real world examples from the research that would make this click for me?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So there's this story about Salvatore Iaconisi. He was an artist, and he was diagnosed with brain cancer.
Oh, wow.
But instead of, just accepting his fate, he decided to hack his own medical data.
Wait, hold on. He hacked his medical records? Like, did he break into a hospital system or something?
Not quite, no. What he did was he made all of his medical data public. He invited anyone and everyone to help him find a cure.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
So he basically, crowdsourced his treatment plan.
Yeah, exactly. And you want to know the really amazing part? Over 500,000 people from all over the world got involved.
500,000 people. That's insane. It just shows how data can connect people in such a powerful way.
It's a perfect example of what we call proactive data activism, right? He used data to empower himself and potentially find new ways to heal.
That's so inspiring. It's like he took this really scary personal crisis and turned it into a way to connect with people and maybe even find solutions that, no one would have thought of otherwise. So is that the only of data activism, or are there other approaches?
There's another side to data activism. We call it reactive data activism. And this is all about protecting yourself, protecting your data from, anyone who might misuse it.
Okay, so this is more about defense. What are some ways people are doing that?
Think encryption, anonymity networks, and basically anything that helps you, well, kind of stay under the radar. There's this app mentioned in the research called Camera V. What it does is it encrypts and protects your photos and videos so they can be used as evidence, but nobody else can access them.
So it's like digital self-defense, kind of. You're building walls to keep your data safe from anyone snooping around. It sounds like this research is saying that those individual choices can actually make a difference.
Totally. Yeah. Every time you choose to use a privacy-focused tool or, question the data practices of a company, you're making a statement. You're pushing back against this idea that our data should just be freely collected and exploited, with no consequences.
Okay, I'm starting to see how all of this connects. So we've got the proactive side, where people are using data to drive change, like Salvatore with his medical data. And then there's the reactive side, which is all about protecting ourselves with encryption and things like that. But both approaches are really about taking back some control, right?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that data isn't just some, neutral force. It's a powerful tool that can be used in a lot of different ways. And ultimately, it's up to us to decide how we want to engage with it.
The research also mentioned this idea of epistemic cultures in connection with data activism, which, I'll be honest, sounds super academic, but can you break that down for me?
Yeah, it's a fancy term for sure.
Yeah.
But think of it this way. Gamers, right? Gamers have their own language and their own ways of evaluating skills that are totally different from, how chefs assess a dish.
Yeah, okay.
Data activists are creating their own data-driven culture, basically. They're challenging the idea that only big data matters.
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, hey, our experiences and perspectives, those are valuable data too.
So they're basically saying there are other ways of knowing and understanding the world, and data can be a tool for revealing those alternative perspectives.
That's really interesting. Do you have an example from the research of how someone is doing that?
Absolutely. So there's this fascinating example from the Syrian conflict. This guy, Elliot Higgins, also known as Brown Moses, basically became a weapons analyst. And get this, all thanks to YouTube.
Wait a second, YouTube, how did he do that? Was he watching cat videos or something?
Not quite. He was meticulously analyzing videos that were posted online by people who were, actually in the conflict zone. He was tracking the types of weapons being used and where they were coming from.
So he was using publicly available data to conduct his own investigations. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's really something. And his work was so impactful that he ended up founding Bellingcat, which is an organization dedicated to open source intelligence. They've even been praised by groups like Amnesty International for their, groundbreaking work. Okay, that's amazing. So he wasn't just watching videos, he was using them as data to understand what was happening in a way that maybe official sources weren't. That's pretty powerful.
It really highlights how data activism can be used to challenge those official narratives,
Yeah.
right? And provide different perspectives on really important events.
All right, so we've got artists battling cancer with crowdsourced treatment plans. We've got citizen journalists using YouTube to become like weapons analysts. It's starting to feel like anyone can get involved in data activism no matter their background. But I'm still curious, what are some of the ways people are using data to actually create change? Is it just about protesting, or are there like more nuanced approaches?
It's definitely not just about protesting, although, well, that can be a part of it. Data activism is actually, really diverse. You can think of data visualization, like creating those infographics or maps that make a complex issue a little bit easier to understand.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could even think about open source intelligence, like what Elliot Higgins did, using data that's, publicly available to investigate things.
So data becomes a tool for storytelling almost. Like you're using it to prove a point or, raise awareness about something important.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes it's even about using data to, well, advocate for changes in policy. There are groups out there who use data to, like, show the impact of pollution in certain neighborhoods or track how effective different social programs are.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like data gives you the evidence you need to have a convincing argument, right? It's not just about your opinions anymore. It's about backing things up with, facts and figures.
Right. And remember that idea of epistemic cultures we were talking about earlier? Data activists are actually using data to challenge this idea that only like certain types of knowledge are valid. They're saying, hey, look, lived experience, that's data too.
Yeah, that was a really interesting point. Can you give me an example of how someone is using data to, well, elevate those lived experiences?
Think back to Salvatore Iaconisi. Right. By making all of his medical data public, he was basically saying, look, there's more to my health than just what's in my medical records, right? There are emotional things, alternative treatments, all these things that the traditional medical system might not even think about.
So he was challenging the idea that, doctors are the only ones who know everything about health. I mean, that's a pretty radical concept if you think about it.
Oh, for sure it is.
Yeah.
And it shows how data activism can really empower people to take control of their own narratives, right? And challenge the systems that might be failing them.
This is all so fascinating, but I have to admit, I'm still trying to figure out how everyday people can actually get involved. It seems like you would need some level of, technical skills or expertise to do any of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a really common misconception. And it's one of the things that data activists are really trying to change. They believe that, data literacy should be something everyone can access, not just tech experts.
So you don't need to know how to code or anything to be a data activist. What are some ways that people can, get involved without having to become data scientists or anything like that?
Well, it starts with having a basic understanding of how data works. And while there are tons of free resources online, like courses and articles that can teach you the basics of data analysis, it's not about becoming an expert overnight, right? It's about being able to ask important questions about data. Like, where did this data come from? Or who collected it? Or what might be missing from this picture?
So it's like becoming a data detective, kind of, right? Learning how to look through all that information overload and figure out what's reliable and what's not.
Exactly. And as you, start to get more comfortable with those skills, you can start applying them to the things you care about. You can start looking at the data behind news stories, social media posts, even marketing campaigns.
You mentioned earlier that data activists are also working to make data literacy more accessible in different communities. Can you tell me a little more about what that looks like?
There's some amazing groups out there doing this work. They're training people to collect and analyze data about their own neighborhoods, things like pollution levels or housing costs, or even access to healthcare. And then they use that data to, advocate for change in their local areas.
That's so cool. So they're empowering people to become citizen data scientists, basically, and using data to make a difference in the places where they live. It's like giving people the tools to fight for the things that they care about, armed with, evidence and insights.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times this work is, connected to education and outreach. Libraries, community centers, even some schools are starting to offer these workshops on data literacy It's all about making these skills accessible to everyone, no matter their background or how tech savvy they are.
It sounds like a real movement is building around this, but, I have to wonder, what does the future hold for data activism? Is it something that can, actually create lasting change, or is it just a fad?
I think it definitely has the potential to create lasting change.
Hmm.
We're living in a world that's increasingly driven by data, understanding how it works, how it can be used, how it can be misused. That's so important for, navigating this new landscape.
Hmm.
And data activism is like a key part of that shift. It's empowering people to be more informed and more engaged citizens.
So data activism isn't just about specific causes or, campaigns. It's about creating a society that's more data literate overall. A world where people can use data to, advocate for themselves and hold institutions accountable and maybe even help to shape a better future.
That's a great way to put it. Data activism is about shifting the balance of power,
Hmm.
right? Making sure that data is used to benefit people and not just, corporations or governments.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I've learned so much about data activism and how much of an impact it could have.
And this conversation is really just the beginning. There's so much more to explore and so many different ways to get involved. But I think the most important thing to remember is that data activism is a movement that's, well, it's gaining momentum and it has the potential to change the future in some really big ways.
I totally agree. And speaking of changing the future, this brings us to the big question we want to leave our listeners with. We've talked about individual actions, we've talked about community initiatives, but, well, ultimately, how do we as individuals contribute to creating a culture where data is used for good, for empowerment and positive social change?
Yeah, that is a big question. It feels like we've gone, down this rabbit hole of data activism. We've got these personal stories and these huge global investigations. But where do we go from here? How do we make that culture where data is actually a force for good? It's a question that, well, I think we all need to be thinking about.
Yeah.
And there's probably not one perfect answer, but I think the research gives us some hints.
Okay, so where should we start? What are some things people can do even if they don't, have a tech background or anything like that?
I think a lot of it comes down to mindset.
Yeah.
It's about being curious,
Yeah.
right? And questioning the information that you see and not just, taking everything at face value.
So okay, when I'm scrolling through, Facebook or Instagram or reading a news article, I should be thinking about the data behind it, not just blindly believing whatever it says, right?
Exactly. Just ask yourself, where did this data come from? Who collected it?
Yeah.
What's missing from this picture? Developing that healthy skepticism, that's a huge part of becoming, data literate.
And I guess that goes for the data that we make ourselves, right? All the stuff we share online, where we are, all of our browsing history, that kind of thing.
For sure. Being aware of your own digital footprint is so important. And taking steps to protect your privacy. Using strong passwords, thinking about what you share online, even just checking out some of those privacy-focused tools that we mentioned before, those are all, forms of data activism in a way.
So it's we're all responsible for our own, a little section of this whole data world,
Yeah.
right? But beyond individual things, I'm curious about those community initiatives. What are some ways that people can get involved, on a larger scale?
Well, supporting organizations that are fighting for data rights and data literacy, that's a great place to start. There are all these groups out there working for stronger privacy laws, and promoting data transparency, teaching data skills in communities that, well, need more support. Donating your time or your money to those groups can make a real difference.
And what about those, community projects where people are using data to work on local problems? How can someone, get involved with something like that?
Look for groups in your community that are working on things you care about. Could be anything, really. Environmental justice, housing, education. They're usually ways to volunteer, contribute data, even help with the analysis part.
Wow, it's pretty amazing to think that even if you don't have any special tech skills, you can still be a part of these projects. Data activism is way more accessible than I thought.
Exactly. And the more people who get involved, the more we can shift that balance of power, right?
Wow.
Make sure data is being used to help people, not just, make companies or the government more powerful.
Yeah, that's a really powerful thought. It's we're all working together to make a future where, data helps people instead of being used against them.
I really enjoyed talking about all this with you. I hope this deep dive has shown you a new way to look at data and how powerful it can be. And, of course, the role we can all play in, shaping how it's used in the future.
Yeah, me too. This has been a total game changer for me, for real. I understand so much more about what data activism actually is, why it matters, and how we can all be a part of it. And to everyone listening out there, we hope this has inspired you to, really think about data, take steps to protect your own privacy, and maybe even look for ways to join this growing movement for a more just and equal data world. Thanks for listening, everyone. I